biological father gave up his parental rights when I was 4. And it's crazy because, I usually have a really good memory and I could remember conversations, word for word, detail for detail. But all I can remember was him and my mom sitting me down and explaining that my mom was getting remarried, but that they had decided that it'll be better if my stepfather was my father on my birth certificate and was financially responsible for me. Mind you, at 4 years old, and I don't even know how you would explain that or something like that to a 4-year-old, but from what I can remember, my parents did the best that they could. But even with their explanation, a part of me, not even a part of me, all of me still lived with this idea that my daddy didn't want me. And it's crazy, we look just alike. And we even have the same birthday, which he has tattooed on his arm. And that was one of the only memories that I had of him and our love for skating. I remember when I was younger, we used to roller skate, and that's kind of where my love for roller skating came from, because it was the hobby and the thing that and DMX that my dad and I had in common. I remember, from that age on, of just feeling like I wasn't loved. Not that I wasn't loved, because I knew that he loved me, maybe, but I just felt like something was wrong with me. Like, how at age 4, I wasn't even really old enough yet, but how you knew at age 4 that you didn't want to be my dad. I felt like he didn't want to be my dad. And it's crazy because I was doing research, not at 4, but in recent years, and I found out and I learned that, over 43% of the U.S. Population grew up without a father. And that's across all races and all ethnicities. But within the Black community, that number is doubled. And that was back in, 2020, so I can only imagine what that number is like now. And so I know that I'm not alone in that. But, but that was a story, that I was telling myself, right? And like I always say, when things happen to us, we tell ourselves a story. And sometimes the story that you tell yourself, I remember I heard T.D. Jakes say this once, but, the story that you tell yourself is sometimes what's killing yourself. But that was a story that I constantly told myself, that my daddy didn't want me, that I was unloved, that I was broken, that I was damaged, that something was wrong with me. And it didn't help that when people found out that I was being raised by a single mother, or that my dad wasn't active in my life, it was almost like they treated me like I had a scarlet letter on my chest. If you've ever read the book, The Scarlet Letter, one of my favorite books, it's like it speaks about in older times, in ancient times, where not ancient but older than now, where they would mark women who they felt like were damaged or like set apart. I would hear people talk about, daddy issues. When I would get into disagreements and with men, they would always say, my daddy issues. And, people just treated me like somehow not having my father in my life meant that I was missing something, or that I was lacking something. And whereas when I was younger, it hurt me. Especially when you hear more about my story and just how that's played out. But what was at one point hurt turned into anger. I think it's so important. I talk about this a lot of times with my clients, that many a times, like, you have your primary emotions and then you have your secondary emotions. And a lot of times we consider anger to be a primary emotion when in reality it's actually a secondary emotion. And usually anger stems from hurt, and it's triggered by hurt. And so I didn't know how to manage hurt, and I was never really taught how to manage hurt. So all I knew was anger. And Lord knows it showed. It showed. And it played out. I didn't realize until later on in life just how much, but it played out in my relationships with men, how I saw men, how I saw love, even how I saw fatherhood. I used to, and I used to say I used to never want to get married, and I didn't want a family. I didn't want to be a mother. And I think I said that. I don't know if I meant it, but I said it just out of fear of raising a child in a broken home, because I saw what it did to my family and more importantly, I know what it did to me, and I hated it. And I could even go as far as say that I hated him. I hated him for a long time. I also have an older sibling, so I have 4 siblings in total. I have 2 older siblings and a younger sibling on my mother's side, and then I have an older sibling or older sister on my father's side. And I remember that no matter where I went, and we moved around a lot, but no matter where I went, she would always reach out to me, and on my birthday she would call me, and she would always try to form a relationship with me. But I resented her so much because I felt like, what was it about her that made him want to keep her, but then he didn't want to keep me? And so I hated her and I hated him because I felt like they were denying me something. And so, mind you, I haven't lived in Philly my whole life. And so I've left and I've come back, and I've left and I've come back several times. And so, every time I came back, we would connect. But I can admit it now that I'm older and I'm more mature. I can admit the fact that I hated him so much that I wanted to punish him for leaving me. And in some cases, that was my motivation. I was motivated by wanting to prove to him and to prove to everybody that I was worth loving and that I wasn't damaged. And so when we would connect, he would try, and he would make me angry sometimes because he seemed oblivious to the fact that he hurt me. And it was almost as if he didn't know or realize or believe that he had abandoned me. And so even when he would reach out and he would call, I would just be like, whatever. And then I remember one time in particular when I moved back. This is recently, so I've been in Philly for about 3 or 4 years now, since I moved back from Nebraska. And when I first moved back, I remember him helping me move, and I had been going through, and I had just started to really embark on my healing journey. And so I was trying to give it another shot. And I know I made the mistake that, a lot of us make, is that we try to relive our past. And so I was trying and I wanted him to make up for all the missed time. But the one thing about time is that time is what makes time so valuable and precious is that it's the one thing that you can't get back. And so it's kind of hard to relive those daddy's little girl memories when I'm no longer a little girl. And so he would do things or not do things, and they would trigger me so bad. And it's so crazy because now I think about crazy, but I think about it now, and some of the things that happened weren't even a big deal, right? But they were triggers. I think triggers, I'm not the only one in this, but I think sometimes triggers can make things that are so minor seem so major. Because you what you think is the issue isn't the real issue. And because you haven't addressed the real issue, or you may not even know that you have the real issue, you make the minor issue the major issue. And so he would do, and I'm pretty sure for him, he was like, what did I do? What is wrong? But he would do things or not do things. And it would trigger me so much. And I was someone, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I was someone who I was never really taught how to express myself. And when I did express myself, I got such negative reactions that I learned, or I taught myself, not learned, but yeah, in a way I learned, because sometimes we have to learn and unlearn negative, attitudes and behaviors. But I had learned to suppress my feelings and to suppress my hurt. But then every once in a while, I would get triggered so much, or I would build up that hurt so much that it would come out and like explode. Like it felt like a bomb. I was always a bomb waiting to tick. And so I remember one particular incident when I had first moved back from my current job now. And I don't even remember what he did, but he made me so mad that I cussed him out. Not cursed. Yeah, I know I love to enunciate. Not cursed. I cussed him out from the tip of my hair to the soles of my feet. I cussed him out. And all of the feelings and the anger and the hurt that I had built up over the years just came out. Not only at him, but my sister as well. And I was like, and I remember distinctly, I was like, "You're not my father." And I said, "I hate you." And mind you, I had never said it out loud. I had never admitted it to anybody. But I had gotten so mad that I said, "I hate you. And I never want to see you again." Like, I was mad, and I blocked him. And I didn't block my sister, but I stopped talking to her. And of course, some time went past, and I didn't think anything of it, maybe a month or so. And then I got a call from my sister. And she told me, and mind you, when she called me, I could tell that she had mixed feelings about calling me. But she was just like, I don't know if you care or not, but Daddy had his second heart attack. And this one's really bad. My dad, if you ever met my dad or ever seen my dad, and many of you probably haven't, but he is, to be in his 60s, he's very active and, fit. And, he was known to he loved his bike, and he rode his bike, and, he beat the street with his feet, child. And he was known to be in good shape. So I never, I think as we get older, we don't ever imagine our parents getting older too. But it was the harsh reality that he was getting older. And I remember so mind you, I missed the phone call. I was at work and I missed the phone call. And so I listened to, there was a voicemail that she left. And so I listened to the voicemail, and I didn't really know how to feel. A part of me was still angry and still resenting him. I think sometimes, we don't talk about resentment enough, but like that built up hurt and anger was resentment. I didn't know how to feel. And I remember that I had called my mom, and I had called my other siblings, and I was just like, "He's in the hospital. I don't know if I should go or how I feel." I mean, I don't, and I was confused because I cared. And I was mad at myself for caring, And I don't know about y'all, but like I have been, and sometimes it still happens to me. I have a really big heart, and I'm very compassionate. I think people think that I'm mean because I have RBF, resting bitch face, and I have a very tough exterior. But when you get to know me, I'm actually super compassionate and super sensitive, and I have a really, really big heart, and so I do forgive easy. And so sometimes I get mad at myself for caring so much, and for being sensitive, and for feeling, and for being so forgiving. Because I think sometimes when we forgive, we feel like we're weak, and that we're letting people walk over us and get away with something. And I felt like me forgiving him and me caring about him meant that I was letting him get over on me again, and that he wasn't getting payback for leaving me. And I remember I'm just venting, and then my sister and my brother was like, whoa, what do you mean he didn't love you? He said, "That man loved you." He loves you. I said, "But none of our daddies loved us. Your father loved you, and he loved us." And I was like, "You know what you're talking about." And I called my mom, and she was like, "No, he definitely loved you." And she explained to me, that it wasn't his choice to, to give away his parental rights. He felt like, it was my mom's, there was a group decision of, they felt like my stepfather was in a better financial position, to take care of me. And my mom wanted us all to have the same last name so we could really be a family. And that he was just trying, to do what's best for me, but that he always still felt like he was my father, and that it didn't mean that he didn't love me. And I remember literally, I went silent on the phone because I was in shock. It was like, it's like when you tell yourself a story for so long, even if it's not true, because just because you're telling, and I've learned, just because you're telling yourself a story doesn't mean you're telling yourself the right story, right? And I had been telling myself and replaying the same story over and over again for so long that it never occurred to me that it was wrong. And I was flashing back to the things that I said to him and how I've treated him and my other sister out of anger. And this whole time I was wrong. And what was even worse is that everybody else was so surprised, as if I knew. And I remember I got upset with my mom, like, why are you talking to me like I knew? I didn't know. You didn't tell me that. He said, and most of them assumed that I knew already, but I didn't. And when I tell you, it felt so horrible. I was playing back the last things that I said to him. And so mind you, I ended up calling my sister back, and they had told me that he was in surgery. They didn't know anything. I remember I left work early. I was like just driving and crying. Like, I remember I just kept saying, I'm laughing. Sometimes I laugh when I'm uncomfortable, but I just kept saying, like, God, please, like, I can't have that be the last thing that I say to that man. Like, I didn't want him to die. I didn't want anything to happen, and that be the last thing that he heard me say was that I hate you. Because I really didn't mean it. Even when, I kept using that word hate, and I realized I didn't really hate. I wanted to hurt him to the level that he hurt me. And I think that's common. I think, they have a saying, hurt people. And I was hurting, and I wanted him to hurt the way that I hurt. And I didn't really mean it. And so I was like, oh God, I promise, if you give me a second chance to do this right, I promise that I will be better, and I won't do that. I remember he came out of surgery, and when I got there, mind you, I hadn't seen my other side of my family in years, and it was bittersweet because they were just so happy to see me, because they used to invite me to things, and I never came. But it was bittersweet. So you're like, oh my gosh, Nene. Everybody, my family calls me Nene. I can always tell if you know me, how well you know me by what you call me. And so my family on both sides call me Nene, because all of my siblings, we all have the names that begin with the letter T. And so I'm not TT or T, I am Nene in my family. And so they're just like, Nene, I'm so happy to see you. I'm so happy to see me. But we were also so worried. I remember, like, between me and my sister, we were rotating nights, because even when he came out of surgery, he was under the anesthesia, and he hadn't come to yet. And at that time, like, I'm a big Grey's Anatomy fan, and I felt like I was a doctor. I done watched so much Grey's Anatomy. I was like, I'm a doctor. I'm like, oh my God. So I'm replaying all of the scenes that I had things I saw on Grey's Anatomy. I'm like, God, please. I remember I used to be, whenever I wasn't at work, I was there. At that time, I was living in Germantown, which is on like the northern side of Philly, and he was out west, which is where I'm from, and where my family lives in Southwest Philly. And so I was commuting back and forth. When I wasn't at work, I was there. I would sometimes be working from the hospital. I was like, I wanted to have the opportunity, as soon as he woke up, I wanted him to see me there. So I remember one particular day, he finally woke up, and the nurse was saying to me, like, and to my sister, she was like, he's awake and he's responsive, but he's not talking yet. And so, like, he can hear you, he understands, but he's not talking. And I was like, that's all I needed to hear. I remember I had a whole praise break, like in the lobby, and I was like, I had a whole speech prepared. But then as soon as I got in there and he opened his eyes, I just bawled. Y'all, I cried. cried. And I told him that I was sorry. And for all the things that I said and that I didn't mean it. And my dad isn't really the most emotionally expressive person. I mean, and most of the men in my life have never been or aren't now. And so his eyes were open. I could tell from how he was looking at me that he heard me and that he understood. And he squeezed my hand. And y'all, it was just like all of the hate and all of the anger left my body. And that's not to say that, that I was instantly healed and instantly cured, but I'm just like, thank you, God, like just having another shot. I think sometimes we, and it's like, it's crazy because even like when I was going to therapy prior to that, it's like, I think a lot of times I can always tell when somebody's been in therapy because they come out talking about their childhood trauma and blaming everything on our parents. And I think it's easy to blame our lives and the outcomes of our decisions on our parents. But I remember I was sitting there while he was sleeping, and I was like, you know what? At the end of the day, what I've learned from the work that I do and even in my personal life is that we're all human, and our parents are human just like us, and they did the best that they could with what they had. And, and I think sometimes where we blame them for things that if people knew better, they would do better. And I hate to say that, it make it sound so simple, but it is. In the same way that our parents may not have done everything exactly right or exactly how we wanted them to do it, it doesn't mean that they loved us any less or that we should love them any less. And even as I've gotten to know my father and I had to learn, I think that sometimes too in relationships, I tell my clients this, that sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, but that we're constantly growing and we're constantly evolving, and relationships, especially ones that are long-lasting, like family, is that sometimes you have to break up with old versions of people and allow them to break up and encourage them to break up with old versions of you so that you can build newer and stronger relationships. And so one thing that I had to do was I had to break up with the old ideologies and the old feelings and the old relationship that I had with my father and create a new one. And it sounds simpler, or easier said than done, but it was possible. And in doing that, I never got the apology that I wanted. I never got the things I thought I wanted, or he hasn't always said the things that I thought he would say, but I've also gotten to enjoy him in ways that I never would have had I never opened up the possibility to it. And he's actually pretty cool. And we have a lot in common. And it's actually been a very rewarding relationship, especially like recently when I've been going through a lot of personal, challenges. He has been somebody who was somebody I can call on and depend on. And I just thank God because, had I not done that, who's to say, that couldn't have been what it is today. And I think, I'm learning, and what I continue to learn and what you'll see as a common theme throughout this is that, life is short, and sometimes we don't realize that hurt and the pain and the hate, it's because of that anger, which sometimes it is hate that we hold on to. Sometimes just, I guess, even the past that we hold on to, that sometimes that it prevents us from accepting the new. Like, I remember this picture distinctly. I used to have it in a frame in my office for my students to see. It would have a little girl who's holding this raggedy teddy bear. And in front of her is white Jesus, which I have my own opinions about. But it was a white Jesus, and he's holding this bigger, fluffier, cuter stuffed animal behind his back. And he's saying, like, give me that so that I can give you this big fluffy one. And many of us, because it's so familiar and it's comforting, and it's comforting not because it's actually helping, but it's comforting because it's familiar and we know it and we're used to it, but we're holding on to it because we're afraid that if we let it go, there's a possibility that what's behind your back or behind his back isn't better. But when I think about my life, despite what people may say and despite the scarlet letter that others try to put on me and you, whoever I'm talking to, about what it means to be a daddyless daughter or a fatherless child, I learned a few things. That number one, is that, first off, being daddyless and being fatherless looks differently for everybody. For me, it was not having a dad on paper. For some people, they had a father figure in the home, but they were mentally or emotionally unavailable or physically unavailable. Some people have never met their dad. Some people's parents have died either before they were born, while they were still living life, or just in different capacities. But that being daddyless, or even just being parentless, or being what I call an orphan, it looks differently for everybody. But I think one of the great things about God, and I mean, I don't care what people say, I'm going to always bring God into it because of my story. But I think sometimes we over spiritualize him and we don't see him in everyday natural occurrences. But I think something that makes him so great and so special is that he has a way of making sure that you still have what you need, even if it doesn't come from where you think it's going to come from. And so it's like, there were things that, people thought I didn't have because my father wasn't as active in my life. But what I didn't get through him, I got through my mom, right? If you ever met my mom's an OG child, okay? And she put me on so much game, not just me, but my friends, whoever my friends are. My mom has a way of bringing you into the fold. And so my mom has always put me and my friends and my siblings on to so much game about life, and whatever my mom didn't teach me, God allowed different men to show up in my life throughout my life, and still to this day, who were always dropping, what I call pearls of wisdom, and who love me and who support me. It was counselors, it was teachers, it was, fathers of my friends, I have so many brothers, and even my older brother. There were things that, people thought I lacked that I didn't. And I think even in that, that's a God. Sometimes we give people too much power. People, the same way that God and the Spirit moves you to do things and to be things to people, he does that for you too. And so he sent people in my life throughout the course of my years to impart in me the things that maybe a traditional father or would have given, Mind you too, my father, maybe I think how it was designed, no, he wasn't as active in my first 20, but what he's done for me in the last few, in some ways made up for what I missed in previous years. And maybe I needed to have him in this season and not in that one, but even more than that, I always tell people that my father, I think everyone has a different relationship with God, but when I think about God and what he is to me, is that he is my father, because he's the first man, and he's not a man, but he is the love that I've always wanted, the love that I've always searched for. I found it in that relationship with him. That when I was in my room and in my house in tears in the dark, talking, or what I thought was me talking to myself, he was there. And there are still times, and even now, I'm getting him now, I get chills, and it feels almost like he's wrapping his arms around me and giving me a big bear hug. And it's a reminder to me, and I hope it serves as a reminder to you, that God is love. At the end of the day, he is love. And the word says that he's a father to the fatherless, or the mother to the motherless, and the friend to the friendless, and that he is whatever you want him to be. And so no matter what capacity you may be experiencing not having, mind you, in my case, it was my father, but maybe a parent, a guardian, a friend, a loved one, and you felt like, oh, because I didn't have the traditional family, or I came from a broken home, or because I didn't have this, that somehow you thought that you were less than, or that you didn't have. That's not true. I want to be the one to tell you that's not true. I look at my life and all that I've accomplished. I lacked nothing. I missed nothing. And I think that when you learn to understand that and to see that, it's like that teddy bear. You're able to let go what you think is better to actually receive better. And I've had the opportunity to receive better, and it feels pretty damn good. And the irony is I'm actually recording this on Father's Day. And so to all the men out there, especially, and even to the women, the folks out there who are parents and are parent figures, I'm my auntie, but we're parent figures to parent to children who aren't your own. Kudos to you, and happy Father's Day to all my fathers and my mothers who are active in father roles. Even though you're not perfect and you may not get everything right all the time, you show up. And what you do is appreciated, it is seen. And if you're not being told that and you're listening to this, or your kids are too young to tell you that, let me be the one to tell you that. Now, even if others don't see it, in spirit, I see it and he sees it. And that is all that matters. So keep showing up. Keep doing the damn thing, because as you can see, over half the world, especially in the Black community, we need you. We need you and we love you.